Hello and welcome everyone back to another Motogp Extra podcast. Today is our first of our post-season podcast that we mentioned in the season finale. Joining me today, as always, is Rhys. Now, today we are doing our top 25 riders in the championship, pretty much all of the main riders from the season. We're going to do our rider ratings. We've spent a good hour going through championship results, comparing them to their teammate, giving little notes on why certain riders have scored certain points. Now, this is all subjective to riders in their team, their current machinery, their level of experience, and how we felt they performed. So some ratings might feel harsh for some, and some might seem a little high for others. So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to jump straight in, Rhys, with P25. Take it away.
Well, Cal Crutchlow, of course, bottom of the table, and I've actually got him down as a 6 out of 10 here. Now, that might seem a bit high, but of course, like you said, we have considered circumstances with this, and these are also the first time we're hearing each other's scores. We've done it separately, so you have to let me know what you think of that in a minute. But I think, considered the circumstances, he's a retired rider, test rider. They don't run him that much, to be honest, either. So it's not like he has like a lot of running on the bike. Now, I think he probably did get a bit of a heads up this time because obviously he was filling in for Dovizioso, who left at Misano, and I think that was known for a while that was going to happen. So we had a decent amount of time to prepare for that. But I think overall he did a great job. He was the second Yamaha on a couple of occasions. His first race being one of them, he was top Yamaha, in fact, in that race because Quartararo got knocked off. So if you could jump on the bike straight away as a test rider and beat all the other riders on the bike, obviously aside from Quartararo, I think you've done well enough, retired rider. So I think 6 out of 10, considering his performances, was more than fair.
I have also gone with a very similar score. I've gone with 6.5. In my notes here, I have great job on short notice. Now, again, you did point out the fact that he obviously would have found out a lot earlier than the average person because he would have known in the team that Davi was going to leave. There was rumours that Davi wanted to leave at Mugello. It was going so badly. He didn't want to come back after the Mugello race, but they kind of enticed him with a bit of money or whatever to stay and come back to finish off the majority of the season. So Cal had a bit of time to prepare. He was testing a few times before he actually got on the racetrack in the race team. So again, he's a retired rider, but he's a very fit rider. He loves the cycling, Cal, so there was no kind of question whether he'd be out of shape or anything. But the fact he did so well on the bike, pace-wise more than anything, was a real shock, probably to Frankie Morbidelli as well. But I think 6.5 for me, considering short notice, top Yamaha, scoring 10 points in 6 races, and he finished in the points 4 out of the 6 races. So can't really credit him any more than that. He's done a brilliant job on his return, and I think it was a good reminder that he came back, showed people what a rider he was and how good he was. But I think we're both kind of coots here to think that we're both on the same level, 6 and 6.5. We're both quite consistent there.
Yeah, I think definitely we are pretty much level pegging there. So I think that probably says we're about right in terms of the estimation there for Cal.
Probably.
And I think also it's probably worth noting as well that it almost suggests that perhaps he retired a bit too soon because, he's been, right on the pace. Obviously, it's his own personal decision, but also it was partially because, just sort of how the market lined up. So, I think it would have been nice to see Cal on the grid for the last couple of seasons full time, but I think he did a great job this year. He also did a great job when he stood in the year before, and we never know. And perhaps he'll have to stand in this year as well, and we'll have to see. Maybe we'll be rating him this time next year as well. Who knows?
But yeah, we're going to move on now to his teammate in the patrol, or in the RNF team, I should say.
Almost slipped there. It's been a whole year. Come on.
Almost. I know. I'll be coming back in a minute saying I'll be saying all sorts of different things later in the podcast, so it won't be the first of slip-ups I have. But anyway, we're going to move on now to the first of our South African brothers, Darren Binder. I gave him a 4. Basically, I actually thought his season was better until I looked at the results. He had 3 points finishes only. He didn't crash as much as I remember, but he crashed a lot in practice in qualifying. He did crash throughout the weekends. He didn't actually have as many race crashes as I remember. Decent pace for a rookie, but crashed is my kind of main takeaway from the season. What about you?
I've actually also put him as 4 out of 10. I've got here really good beginning to the season. I think his first few races, I think just because of what we expected. Look at how his Moto3 campaign ended. Like the last race of the season, he just absolutely speared into Dennis Fodger and knocked him off. So we kind of expected we'd get that kind of thing, like torpedo crashing all the time. And I think the start of the season was pretty good. I mean, he was beating Dovizioso on some occasions. I don't know whether overall in the race he ended up finishing ahead, but I remember looking at the standings and seeing him ahead on a fair few occasions through the races, also in different sessions. So I think his beginning to the season was pretty good, much better than expected. In fact, we even gave him a shout out, I think, all the way back in Qatar. But yeah, he crashed too much towards the end. I think he actually did end up topping the crash charts out of everybody, out of all three classes. So does show they did crash a bit too much. But I think the 4 out of 10 is warranted because, yeah, he was much better than we expected. We thought it was going to be absolutely woeful. Whereas really, he showed himself not to be too bad of a MotoGP rider because, let's be honest, the bike he's on, it's not exactly a good bike.
Yeah, again, big thing is a lot of people had a perceived image of Darren when he came into the class that he didn't deserve the seat. And we're not going to go into today whether he did or not, but everyone thought he would struggle more, and for him to be that good, scoring points, getting a top 10 in his second race, beating his brother in Indonesia in the West, showed off some. He kind of really put his stock value through the roof, and kind of gave himself a lot more credit than he was getting from a lot of people coming into it. So I think, again, we're pretty close. Again, 4 out of 10 for both. So I think we both agree that he showed some good signs this year, but I think he's still a bit off his complete package of what he do. But hopefully we might see him back in the class in the future, as he has dropped back to Moto 2 this year, of course. Moving on now to another rider from the Southern Hemisphere, Remy Gardner. Now, Remy has had a weird year. I'm going to leave you take this one away, and I'll give your rating first to see how far apart we are.
I've given him 3 out of 10, which probably does seem a little bit harsh, but I'd say he was pretty anonymous throughout the whole year. I honestly can't really think of anything he did all year, to be completely honest. And in the end, he got beaten by his teammate. So I do remember him being, the better of the two of them, because obviously they both struggled. We will come on to Raul, of course, next, so I don't want to talk too much about him here. But the Tech 3 lads, they didn't have a great season. I thought, to be honest, that Gardner wasn't. They were both pretty much even. I don't really have a lot to say about them because you never saw any of them. They were always just sort of bottom of the timesheets every session, every race. I'm surprised they've beaten Darren Binder, actually, to be honest. I thought Binder probably would have outscored them, but I guess that's not me paying. Well, probably that is down to Darren's crashes. Perhaps if he'd stayed on in a couple of those races, he would have potentially beat these guys. But yeah, not a lot to say about Remy Gardner. Obviously, best of luck to him in World Superbikes. He has been obviously ousted out of KTM a bit unceremoniously, but yeah, he didn't really do a lot this year. But yeah, 3 out of 10 for me.
I actually gave him slightly higher, and now I'm kind of thinking maybe I've gone a bit too high on your points, because I'm actually looking at the standings now and I've just realised that he was beaten by his teammate in the last race, and that was the 1 point swing they needed. There was actually 2 points between Fernandez, Remy and Binder at the bottom of the championship, and I've given him a 4.5. Now, my vision of why I gave him such a kind of high rating for someone who had such a poor season, 13 points, P23 in the championship, is because so much was going on immediately when he joined that team off track that cast shadows on what he was able to do in his first season. So I gave him a slightly higher rating. Again, like I mentioned at the start of the podcast, that it's not going to be just solely down to results based. It'll be kind of have other issues brought into it, and there was so many issues with his father, with the team. They were saying that he was unprofessional. He had a big crash in Le Mans. This probably is the only time I can actually remember him being on TV. He had a massive crash coming out of Museum, huge high side, really beat himself up. So tough year, but I think probably a 4 is probably more likely, but I'm going to stick with my 4.5 just because of there was so much going on off track, and I felt sorry for him for a lot of the season. And again, KTM are in such a poor position at the moment that I think I just gave him slightly higher rating because I kind of feel bad for him, and he had to go through a lot this year other than just riding a poor bike. Now, moving on, we've already touched slightly on his teammate Raul Fernandez. For me, 3 out of 10. My main note here is poor mentality. He came into the season basically not wanting to ride it. He didn't look like he was trying. I'll be interested to see what you say about him, but he just seemed to have terrible attitude coming into his rookie year in a GP class. So for me, he didn't pull any trees up. He didn't look like he was trying for much of the year. His best result was he got 2 P12s, P12 in Valencia and also in Germany. So again, riding point, not many, only 5 times this year was he in the points. So again, you could put that down to the bike, but the fact he came into the season with such poor mentality, fair enough, he didn't want to be there, but you turn up, you give it your all, and that's why he got such a low rating compared to Remy. I'm interested in here though what you gave Raul Fernandez.
Well, I actually also gave him 3 out of 10, so I give
Oh,
him the
right.
same rating as I gave to Gardner. Kind of as I alluded to, they're pretty much level pegging, I suppose, in terms of points, both right at the bottom. I have got on here poor attitude, and yeah, that does factor into it a little bit. But I also just thought, I'm just going to rate him based on sort of his actually on track, because I also do feel for him a little bit. Yeah, he probably didn't handle the situation the best, but I mean, he's been forced to go up into a class he didn't really want to go up into, and a team he didn't want to be in, on a bike he didn't want to be on. And then he got hurt pretty early on as well in testing with it. So I could kind of understand why he probably didn't have the best attitude. I know still doesn't excuse it exactly. He struggled a lot with the package, of course, and he crashed quite a lot. I mean, they both did really, but I remember Raul crashing quite a bit. So overall, in terms of points, pretty much similar. Races, I guess they were similar. And in the end, really, we're saying obviously Raul wasn't trying. I believe back to like Jerez, I think he was out with like an injury, but I'm pretty sure people in the paddock said they saw him like tazzing around on the paddock scooter and stuff, and like he definitely could have raced, but he probably just didn't want to be on the bike. But I think that almost also speaks more about Remy, that even the guy that wasn't trying beat him. So that's also another reason why the ratings are quite similar, because really Remy should have won out of the two of them if Raul wasn't putting his 100% in.
Yeah, I am looking here at the championship standings. He did not start. Rod Fernandez did not start in Portugal and withdrew from Jerez. So again, just the whole team that year was a weird situation with both riders. There was just a lot going on off track, and that kind of mirrored majority of their season on track. So again, I think we both agreed on Raul Fernandez there. P21, 15 points, an old head of Andrea Dovizioso. Take it away. What did you give him?
I gave him 2 out of 10. Well, he couldn't adapt to the Yamaha package. He had half a season in 2021 to try and do that. He couldn't do it. He had the whole winter of this year. He couldn't do it. He had he didn't have the whole of this year because he left early. That's also penalised him for me as well. I mean, you're a professional MotoGP rider, at least see out your whole contract. It's a little bit weird to leave mid-season, but he just couldn't adapt to the package. Like I said when I was talking about Darren Binder, I saw that he was beating Dovizioso in some of the sessions, and that has penalised Dovizioso as well. As much as it boosted Binder's score for me, it's also penalised Dovi's, because, while yes, he was struggling with the package, he has ridden a Yamaha before. I know it's probably nothing like that Yamaha, but back in the day he did ride a Yamaha, and he's a really experienced rider. He shouldn't have been beaten by a rookie, no matter on the bike, really. So that's kind of what's done it for me. I mean, if we remember back to probably this time last year, everyone was like, "Oh, Rossi's season was poor." It was, he definitely should have left. I mean, Dovizioso was worse than Rossi was last year. So, yeah, I would say definitely 2 out of 10 for Dovizioso there. Not a terrible season, and he didn't even see it out.
Yeah, you penalised for some of the points that I didn't actually. So leaving, my rating looks a bit high now that I look at it. I give him a 4 out of 10. And my defining factor was he should have stayed doing the Italian motocross championship, and he just shouldn't have come back. It was, if we go back to the last year, he didn't have any pace. He got on the bike, he said the bike felt weird, it felt long and low and slow. He didn't show any kind of progress this year. He didn't show any one lap speed. He didn't seem to have anything in the races. So I probably look at it now, maybe I give him slightly too high of a rating, but yeah, I can agree on all points there that you probably should knock him a few points. The fact that he was a little unprofessional trying to leave so early, trying to get out of Mugello first off, and the team kind of getting to Misano with him. So probably not the way he should have ended his career, because he's had a glittering end to his career. He's had his world championship back in the mid 2000s in the lower categories, many race wins up against the likes of Marquez and Rossi. So he has a very good, solid career, and he'll have a lot to look back on. But he's ended in quite a bad manner in my way. And again, now you mentioned that he left so early in the season. It's just kind of, it's a bit of a shame really, but I think he just got to a point where he had enough and he needed to get away, because he was riding around miles off the pace anyway, and every weekend was the same for him. But 15 points in P21. Not great. So we're going to move on now to our Italian rookie, Fabio Di Gianantonio. Now, I gave him a 4 out of 10. Some sparkles, but not enough throughout the season. Of course, he stuck it on pole in Mugello. He didn't really have much going from this year. There's not any other standout rides that I can think of. He finished 11th in Mugello after getting pole. Got P8 in Germany. That was kind of it. Handful of points, scores. Didn't crash his brains out. Kind of spent most of the season P18, P17 going around. What did you make of his year? Is 4 too high, or are you close to me with that?
No, I've also given 4, so
okay.
probably about bang on with that.
Yeah.
Again, in terms of the points I've written down, similar to you, pole at Mugello. So there's always a high point in the Italian GP. Just before the Valencia Grand Prix, actually, there was some sort of articles talking about how he was struggling a lot mentally. I think he was struggling. I don't think he got on with his crew chief particularly well either. So I think there was a little bit of friction there. So he has struggled over this season, but some signs of brilliance there. I didn't even remember Sachsenring, but fair enough, that's a decent result. So perhaps middle part of the season for him, Mugello, Sachsenring, they are only like a couple of rounds apart, so maybe that little purple patch there. But you got to look where his teammate finished. I know his teammate had one more year under his belt, and I know as the season went on, the bikes were not the same anymore. Bastianini had all of the new parts from like the GP22 strapped onto his GP21. But even still, you look at his teammate third in the championship, so that's definitely got to penalise him a bit. But because he's a rookie, I've not been too harsh on him for that. But the gulf between them was quite large. I'd say he definitely needs to try and be closer to Alex Marquez next year, his teammate, perhaps even beat him, really, to put a bit of authority over him. But I think, okay, rookie season, like you say, he didn't crash too many times. And other than his pole at Mugello, I can't really remember anything from him. So that's probably the only thing that's given him a 4 over a 3 for me, really, was that pole position.
Yeah, again, I don't know how many years he'll have in this class, to be honest. I don't know if he's at the level of some of the riders around him. I think he kind of the fairy tale move, moving up with Grassini. I think they want him to do well, but will he actually... He'll probably give him more time just because of the relationship with the team, but I could see him being replaced next year for 2024 if there's not some sort of uptake and improvement. We're going to move on now to probably, in my opinion, one of the most disappointing riders of the season, P19, Frankie Morbidelli. Rhys, what did you give poor Frankie?
I've given 2.5, so 2.5 out of 10. Really, my points here, nowhere near his teammates. The only round he was anywhere near him in terms of pace was Sepang, so I'll give him credit there. But he was absolutely nowhere all season. Obviously, to be honest, at the end of last year, he came back and we're like, oh, he struggled a bit. But yeah, maybe he's still recovering from his knee injury. His end of last year was better than his entire this year. And that was supposed to be poor for him. Think about, 2 years ago, 2020, he was second in the World Championship on the 2019 Yamaha. I know Yamaha have been struggling to get that 2019 style feeling back on the bike, but this bike was supposedly more like that. Fabio liked it more, but Morbidelli just couldn't find it. I've also docked him down a bit as well because he picked up quite a lot of silly penalties all year. I mean, there was several rounds where he was dawdling on the racing line, getting in people's way. I mean, he got in his teammates' way at one point. That's a big no-no. I mean, he got in one of his friends' way as well, which they were both championship contenders. Not that should matter. If you get in anybody's way, it should be the same penalty. But, even still, he wasn't even thinking about that. And just overall, obviously, he's just got to improve next year if he wants to keep his seat, because there'll be plenty of people that want that. I mean, I know the Yamaha's been struggling a bit, but I reckon the likes of Rins, they'd be a good candidate for that. Obviously, Toprak wants to come across, so there's a lot of fire underneath him. Maybe even a Moto2 rookie might even be a better shot than Morbidelli at this rate, to be honest, if he doesn't improve. So, yeah, 2.5 out of 10. Terrible season. Terrible.
I've gone slightly higher, 3.5. A massive underperformer for me. The small reasons why he's slightly higher, I didn't even actually factor in, to be honest, that he was such penalty prone and the dawdling online. So realistically, he should probably be a 3. But when his biggest issue for me this year was his qualifying, he couldn't do the one lap pace. For a lot of the season, his race pace wasn't as bad as the results were. He just got stuck.
How many times was he up there in FP4?
Yeah, FP4, I was just about to get to FP4. He was usually in the top 8 consistently, so it looks like he could do it over the long runs, but the current style of MotoGP where the front Michelin goes temperature-wise goes through the roof, you can't overtake on a Yamaha. I reckon his season looks worse because if his one lap pace just wasn't there. He's never been, even back to his Moto2 days, he was never the Jorge Martin one lap specialist type of rider. So all the factors of being miles off his teammate, probably not mentally there, losing probably Rossi in the team as well probably didn't help. He had someone who always kind of worked alongside him there in the team, same bike, similar riding style. I definitely think that played a small part into him getting a bit lost this year. And again, we still don't really know how much the injury is affecting him. He'll always play it down as riders always do, saying it's not an issue, but we could go back to far as 2010 with Valentino when he almost broke his shoulder in pre-season, and that came out years later that like back in 16-17 it was still an issue for him. So riders never kind of give you the full picture. They always want to put off an image that they are these kind of warriors with no weaknesses. So I reckon the injury's playing up more than we're led to believe, and his struggling to get it up to speed with one lap pace with that bike was a big issue this year. So the one time, like we said, that he had pace was Malaysia, where he came on P11 in the end, even though he was ahead of his teammate on track, but he had penalties, of course, to serve in that race. So unfortunately, he kind of, anytime he seemed to be doing slightly better, he'd shoot himself in his own foot. So 3.5, I'm going to stick with my 3.5 just because he actually had pace, he just was never able to get it out on where he needed it, which was Sunday at 2 o'clock. So 3.5 for me. Moving on to Taka Nakagami, and I believe he is probably the lowest rider rating I've given, if I can remember correctly. Scanning up and down, he is 2.5. I put down he's lucky still to be here. So a bit harsh, but
he's not far off though. I mean, it's really just because Agora didn't win the championship and you want to move up. That's the reason why he's still there.
So he's had such a bad year. Catalunya playing bowling, knocking off Rins in Mugello, crashing needlessly so many times. He didn't really show any pace this year either. He just seemed to crash, injured himself. I don't know what else to say about him. He's just had a poor year. And I remember at the start of 22 season, I was thinking he's going to need to show something because there's people coming for a seat, and he's very, very lucky to have a 23 seat in my opinion.
Yeah, I've got to agree. I mean, I've given him an even lower rating than you. I've given him 2, same as Dovizioso. I've got down awful season, made himself a nuisance. So, yeah, he kind of knocking people off aggressive passes. To be fair, I don't think he was at fault for the one with Rins, particularly. I think Rins definitely played his part in that one. But I have got down on here, if it was a bowling skills tier list, I would have given 10 out of 10 for Catalunya. What was that? What even was that? I mean, what was he trying to do? I think you make a good point of actually saying he didn't show any pace, whereas in the past he has. I mean, remember back to 2020 where he was so fast. I mean, he was like riding the bike like Marquez. He was right up there. He was on pole position for Aragon. And the amount of times in 2020 where he'd crash out of a podium spot or blow a podium spot, I mean, he'd be nowhere near a podium nowadays. I think it does say probably more about the new Honda than anything, but yeah, even still, just terrible season. Again, other than knocking half the grid off into a corner, if that's your most notable thing of the season, that's not great. Like, I can't even think of anything else he did. So, yeah, I think 2 out of 10, terrible season. Like you say, very lucky to keep that right for next year.
2 P7s were his best result in Jerez and Le Mans. Again, I don't remember them. They were probably races where I just crashed in front of him, to be brutally honest with him.
Hot greasy track. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, one of those kind of Jerez track where it just is ice, but he didn't do anywhere near enough. You go back to talking a bit like Frankie, where he really was on in 2020, but since then he's just a shadow of what he used to be. And again, he's quite like Fabio Di Giannantonio, where he came up into the class. He was never kind of tipped to be a Jean Mir or a Maverick Vinales when he came up. He was never like kind of highly rated, where he came up on probably on nationality because they needed him in a Japanese back in there, and Honda wanted someone. So I reckon, I said this year will be his last year. Next year is 100% his last year. I don't see him having any way back into another factory seat next year unless something goes terribly wrong somewhere else for someone. I'd actually like to see him go to... I'd like 4 Hondas in World Superbike and see him going over there and see what he could do on a production bike and see. Because I don't think he's a bad rider. I just don't think he's suited to the GP paddock, and I think maybe to a slightly less high stress paddock of the World Superbike scene might be a good look for him. But moving on now from one poor Honda rider to another poor Honda rider, Alex Marquez. I've given him a 5, plagued with Honda issues.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, much higher. And to be honest, I think I gave him a 3.5 in my initial run through. Then I started looking at his results. He actually finished a lot more races than I remember. He crashed ridiculous amounts, but he didn't seem to crash on Sunday very often. He had 4 DNFs all year, which is a lot less in my opinion than I thought he had. And
Yeah, it's not bad.
that's why he got bumped up to a 5. Finished every race he finished was in the points, bar the last 2 races of the season. So best race at P7, also in Portugal. Not a bad year. Crashed his brains out on Friday and Saturday. Managed to steady the ship and bring it home over Sunday is probably his mantle of the season.
Well, I've actually given him a 3. So again, very low. I think I'm being a bit harsh with all these because mine have always been either lower than yours or the same. So maybe I've been a bit too harsh on some of these guys. But I've got many crashes, no pace. Most notable thing he did was plough into Miller. That's what I've got written about him here. So again, I mean, it's the same as he's not been as bad as Nakagami because that's the only incident I can think of him really doing. But again, if your most notable incident in the season or most notable thing is taking somebody else out, then it's not great. I mean, yeah, all right. The Honda, it's been pretty poor. Again, similar to Nakagami, really showed some signs of promise in 2020. To be fair, was probably better than Nakagami last year and this year. He's been better than Nakagami, so fair enough to him. And Portimao, actually, now that you mentioned that, I remember actually that weekend he was quite good back in Portimao. And I think, next year could be quite a good season for the guy because I don't think he's bad. I think it's just a lot of it is down to the Honda. It's so difficult. If you're not called Marc Marquez, you can't ride the Honda anyway, let's put it that way. So, be interesting to see him on a Gresini Ducati. I think maybe he could be getting a few more points from me next time we do this.
Yeah, and again, we're going to move on now to P16, 56 points in the championship. Another 300 riders in close concessions, and their season is pretty as bad as the Yamaha boys so far down the championship. Paul Spargaro, 3.5 for me. Tried his best, crashed a lot. We all cast our memories back to him almost winning Qatar. I don't remember him doing anything else for the year, to be brutally honest. I remember him turning up to Silverstone, and where did he finish in Silverstone? P14. But in free practice 1 and free practice 2, because the track had grip, he could use the rear brake, which sounds ridiculous, and had pace. But that was literally the kind of highlight of the year for him. So P3 in Qatar. Didn't really do much else.
Yeah, I've got three points for him again. It's the same as Alex Marquez, because for them, similar seasons as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, great opening round, terrible rest of the year. Obviously got that podium, but even in that race, he bottled it.
Big time.
Obviously, he was leading for quite a while, and then as soon as Bastianini passed him, I mean, he almost went to the car park into turn 1, which then cost him the place to Binder. Now, Binder perhaps would have got him anyway, but even on his best finish of the season, he still made a typical Paul Spargaro mistake, really. I mean, how many times have we seen him bottle it where it matters? I mean, we've seen him crash out of podium spots back on the Tech 3 Yamaha. We saw him on the KTM bottle a race win by, defending when there was no need. I know that was partially the team's fault for telling him the wrong gap, but again, he defended when he didn't need to. Allowed Miller to attack and then got dive bombed. I mean, he could also have done that differently if he'd braked earlier for the last corner, knowing that Miller would send it up the inside. He perhaps would have cut it underneath him like Oliveira did and still won the race. So I know that's nothing to do with this season, but just another example of a Poland mistake into turn 1, running massively wide. Rest of the year, just on the ground most of the time when you saw him. And I'll be glad to see him on a different bike, back on the KTM, because I think he probably will be able to get some good results out of that bike. And judging by that lovely video in testing, I think he's also quite happy to be on the gas bike because he was going down towards turn 1.
Yeah, so his Honda stint is done. Probably wasn't the right move for him to leave KTM because KTM have gone backwards.
Definitely not.
He's gone backwards with Honda. It's great to see him seeming happy to be back on the gas branded KTM. So best of luck to him next year, but a miserable year this year. And the top 15, we are just getting to the start of the top 15. We have another Spaniard, an ex-Motogp world champion. It's hard to say that he's this far down the championship. Joan Mir, 87 points. What did you give him?
4. I've given 4 out of 10. Woeful year, way too many crashes. I mean, you actually mentioned this before the podcast when we were looking at the results, that he actually had a really good start to the season, and both Suzuki riders did. They actually were looking really good at the start of the year, especially with that extra power. But as soon as the team pulled out, both their seasons went downhill. So perhaps I should have given him a little bit of dispensation for that. Maybe if I was to reconsider, I might push him up to 5, to be fair. But he had loads of crashes, when usually it's Rins is the one that does the crashing, but this year it was Mir, injured himself. And then when he did finish, he was also slower than Rins most weekends. So I gave him a 4 out of 10. I will admit that one is probably the first one where I've looked and said, actually, maybe I would give him a 5 if I was to redo it. But you know what? He is a MotoGP champion, like you said, so 15th in the championship should be treated with a disappointing season, regardless of circumstances.
5.5 is what I gave him, and I was going. I kind of went through everyone's name. I looked at their name and kind of just goes, yeah, he kind of did this all year. Bang, that number. Mir was probably the first and one of the only riders I bumped to score up a good chunk. I think I gave him a 4.5 first time round. I bumped it up to the 5.5 because he started the season with P6, P6, P4, P4. Got taken out in Portugal when he was on for a podium. Jack Miller into turn 1. After that, then he P6 in Jerez, which is the weekend they announced they pulled out, and then from there on he just crashed his brains out, and basically 3 top 10 finishes from there on out. So his season was going very well, and I give him a small bit of benefit of doubt that when Suzuki pulled the plug, both Suzuki's riders just their heads went on track because their careers were kind of at a weird turning point. Both riders were actually in contract negotiations to stay with the team, ironically a team that was putting out behind the scenes. So it was just a mess for Suzuki, and both the riders suffered for it. So I think 5.5 is fair. He showed very good pace at the start of the year, did his usual consistency of 6th, 6th, 4th, and then probably was going to get on a podium if it wasn't for Jack in Portugal. So I feel bad for him because he's now moved to Honda, and I don't know how well that's going to go for him, because he seemed to be able to just again maybe fight for the top 3 or 4 in the championship if the year was a bit more normal and Suzuki didn't pull out. But 87 points, P15 behind a couple of rookies, and just a bad year overall from him. I think he'll want to get a fresh start. Now we move on to probably one of my highlights of the season, Marco Bezzecchi. 7.5 for me, a very first impressive year, and he was just really strong in so many races that we didn't expect. And again, I think the kind of modern day Ducati showed how versatile it is and how good of a bike it is. But first year, brilliant. What a rider.
Yeah, I got to say, I agree. I gave him 7, to be fair, but 7.5, quite similar. Best rookie by far. He showed some fantastic pace. He also had a pole position. Was it Boyaran? He got his pole position. He led on a couple of occasions. He led. Did he lead Mugello?
He would have, because he overtook because there was the front 3 of the 2 VR46 bikes and Digi, so the 3 of them. So at one point there was a 1-2 for VR46.
Yeah, exactly. So it was first or second that race. Yeah, Assen, he got on the podium, didn't he? There. Yeah, I can't really fault the guy. Great season. He will need to crash less next year. I've got that down. That's one of the points I got down. But overall, I mean, look at where he is in the championship. I don't know the points exactly. I think you have the points up in front of you. I'm not sure. But 14th place, next highest rookie is it Digi in 20th?
Yep.
So miles ahead of the other rookies. So I think, 7.5. Great season for him. And just keep doing that, and he could be the sort of next Bastianini kind of rider, because this was sort of a Bastianini style rookie season.
You do say he needs to crash less. He crashed 3 times all year in races.
Yeah, but he crashed a lot in practice.
Probably. Yeah, that's a fair point, but just putting out the fact that, again, if we look at the likes of like Marquez for reason, Alex Marquez, I kind of made the point that he crashed loads, but on Sunday he didn't seem to do it as much, and again, that is...
I didn't actually realise he'd only crashed out of 3. I saw he crashed out of more races than that. But even still, those 3 races were potentially 3 points away. And he also, crashing in practice is okay because it doesn't cost you points, but you can injure yourself. So it's definitely somewhere you still mitigate it.
Still agree. And I just wanted to point out.
Yeah, they were also quite big crashes when he did have them. But you make a good point with that one.
Moving on to probably one of the surprises of the year, Marc Marquez, P13, 103 points. What did you rate him?
I've actually given him 7.5. I did have him as 8 initially, but I docked him down. And to be honest, his score could go lower for me or higher because I say it's very hard to judge. He didn't do a lot of the season. He was very poor at the beginning. Obviously, he was struggling. He got beat by Paul at that first round, which that was been the first time for years that he'd been beaten by a teammate in a race, which is completely unbelievable. Then he had the big crash at Mandalika, so he missed a round there. Then he struggled when he came back. I think what was his best, like 4th before that, before he left for the surgery in like Jerez, I think it was. But as it turned out, his arm was like, I don't even know how many degrees it was now, but it was like 40 degrees out of like kilter,
something so
which is
whack,
ridiculous. How he won 3 races last year, I don't know, but he managed to do that somehow. And then once he did come back, of course, he was very competitive. The Honda had got even worse whilst he was gone. And he was by far the best Honda, even though he missed like half the races in the year. I mean, he's like 13th. The next one is 16th, and I'm sure he has a lot more points. I swear he has like double the points of Paul. So he has double the points of the next highest Honda, and he missed like half the season. So yeah, 7.5 for me. Great season for Mark. Obviously not physically a great season, but I think next year the bike might be a bit poor, but we might see some magic performances from him.
He missed a total of 8 races. I gave him a 6.5, and my
first one where I'm higher then.
Yeah, I kind of had a little chuckle to myself when you said 7.5 because I realised it was the first of. It took us 12 riders before you give someone a higher rating. 6.5, unclear his potential due to injury. So again, it's kind of the same as you, where I could give him more, I could give him less. It's just it's such a weird dynamic with Mark because of his injury. Honda being so bad, no other Honda rider has been able to ride it, so you don't know when he's P7, is that where the bike is, or is that Mark is where he is? So there's so many kind of question marks. Again,
question marks.
There's Jesus Rhys.
Sorry.
There is never been a year that he's been so low in the championship in the GP class. 1 podium. Now again, I go back that he missed 8 races and also didn't start in Indonesia because that was the second race season when he gave himself a bad concussion and threw himself to the moon. When he did come back, he was a mid top 10 rider, so 6th and 4th were his kind of result when he came back. 1 pole position in Japan, again, didn't have race pace there. Brilliant, again, the riders track of Philip Islet coming home in P2. And that was his season. I think 6.5, 7 is kind of where he's at because of his injuries, because of Honda's poor machinery. I don't really think it was any fair to give him higher than that. Based on that, the fact he had 1 podium, which is probably the defining fact of his season. Now we move on to the other of the VR46 boys, Luca Marini, P12, 120 points. Take it away.
I'm looking at this one now, and I am thinking this one's a little bit harsh compared to the Marquez score. I've given him 6.5.
Okay.
I think he had a good second half of the season, pretty consistent. I mean, I say second half of the season, but really it was from like Catalonia onwards. So, second 2/3 of the season, he was consistently sort of top 6 rider, and he had some good performances. He didn't quite manage to get on the podium, did he? But he was close on a couple of occasions.
Got 2 P4s in Austria and San Marino.
Yeah, so he was close, and I think he'll be one to watch for next year. Very consistent rider. I think obviously he retired in 1 race, but he crashed in another. But basically, very consistent. He's only DNF'd the 1 race out of his whole career, so that's last season as well. So, yeah, he's on the same bike for next year. This could be a Morbidelli 2020 kind of season, that he's on the same bike, so he can dial in the same settings at every track. He can dial in Bagnaya's settings from last year. He's got all this data to look at, a bike he's comfortable with, same crew. He's coming on in himself anyway, improving. So I know that this is supposed to be more about this season, but I think for next year, he could be fantastic. I think we could be rating him a lot higher, but 6.5, maybe a little bit harsh there for me, but I think pretty good season for him overall, to be fair.
I've gone with a 7. It was a 7.5 at first, and I downgraded it by looking back through his results. He's had, again, another year of just consistency. I've had solid year, very consistent was my notes for him. Didn't get the kind of highlight results of the Bezzecchis or we'll say Bastianini, where they won races, podiums, pole positions and all that kind of stuff. So he kind of went under the radar. He was the only Ducati rider not to get a pole position. and his consistency got him pretty decent results all year. Like, I look back, we go to Magello, he got 6th, 6th, 5th, 17th, 12th, 4th, 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 7th, 6th, and then a couple of mishaps to around off season. So again, finishing top 7 or 8 and top 6s in MotoGP on a second tier bike is nothing to be sniffed at. To do it that consistently, you have to give him some props, and he's always been kind of seen in the shadow of his brother, of course, but he's always seen as a slow builder, a bit like Alex Marquez, where it'll take a couple of years to get at it. And I think this has been a very solid year, and a bit better than most can probably have predicted. So again, I think you make a good point. Next year he'll have a lot of familiar ground to build on, so I think it should be a strong year next year for him. But again, 7 I think is where he's at this year, and I think that is pretty fair. Now, next up is Marco Vinales, and I'm very interested because I reckon we might have some big difference in scores here, judging on what I believe. So P11, 122 points. I'll leave you go first.
Well, actually, you might be surprised because, yes, I've been absolutely championing him all season, haven't I? Every race I've been saying, oh, Vinales, he'll be good this weekend, and then he's been absolutely nowhere. But I've actually only given him a 6 because, for that reason, really, showed signs of potential. He had a great middle part of the season. Silverstone, he almost won. Misano, he almost won. He was doing pretty well in Saxon Ring until his ride-out device failed. He got on the podium at Assen. I know that was partially because of the Fabio and Aleix accident, but he ought to be in the race to finish, on the podium. But he lacked overall his end to the season. Well, both Aprilia riders' end to the season was quite bad, so Aprilia are going to have to be a bit concerned about that. But overall, of course, he was slower than Aleix. If you look at the average, I would say. So 6 out of 10 because he showed signs of potential. But yeah, overall, he wasn't quite there. I think he needs to make a step going into next year, but definitely better than his previous, it's not half a season last year with Aprilia anyway.
I'm actually surprised you went so low. I went 6.5. Showed signs of potential, but went missing in the final third of the season are my notes. And I think a bit of that is down to everyone getting their bikes dialed in more, and at the start of the year, Aprilia having a good bike out of the box and not being able to kind of build upon it throughout the year, because both of the Aprilia riders kind of just got lost from, we'll say, Silverstone to Misano onwards. So both riders seem to went downhill. Both showed very good pace throughout the year, both getting on the podium. So for me, 6.5 is just about enough for him. He does again still though have his tendency to go missing in weekends and races. So until he gets that out, I don't think he'll ever be the rider he could be. But yeah, he just still has some underlying issues that for me make me question his future. But we're in now to the top 10. Miguel Oliveira, who will be on a Aprilia next year. I give him a 5. It's quite harsh, I know. Very harsh. I actually don't rate Miguel Oliveira as high as a lot of people. This next stat will be pretty interesting to most people because they will not realise it. Out of the full season, I believe there's 21 races this year, Rhys. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, 21, yeah, I think.
If you had to guess how many times Brad Binder beat him, how many do you reckon he beat him? How many times How many times did Brad Binder beat Miguel this year?
Well, out of 21 races,
out of 21.
I'm going to say 15 times.
16 times Binder beat him.
Pretty close.
That's how outclassed he was by his teammate. 2 times he beat him, so I would say if it is 21 races, we'll take off the 5. 2 of them were wet races, one which was a mechanical failure for his teammate. So that could have been 17. Okoye, he won 2 races, so a 5 looks really harsh, but he was just outclassed all years by his teammate. If you take away them 50 points out of his championship challenge, he's not had a great year. He comes, again, a bit like Brad, he comes towards the top 10 during the late pace of the race, but his race results are just scattered with P11s, P13s, P9s, P12s, P11. Take out them 2 stunning race wins, and he's had such an average year. I reckon you've rated him a bit higher than that, judging by your reaction.
Yeah, I've given him a 7, actually, because I've got 2 excellent victories here. I mean, they were commanding victories,
100%.
as his others have been, because he just seems to have that knack once he gets to the lead. I think even if his bike wasn't that good, I think if he got into the, on a weekend, but somehow he gets into the lead, I think he can manage it from there, and he can find that little bit of extra pace. But again, nowhere some weeks, like you say, Pace was good, but handily beaten by his teammate. I didn't realise, but when I guessed that I hadn't looked at the results, I just guessed 15. That was partially because of what you were saying, but also because Binder does tend to beat him most weekends. But I will give Oliveira the benefit of the doubt in the fact that when Binder beats him, it's not by like a huge amount usually. Like a lot of the time, they're actually together on track, or there's a bike or two between them. It's not like a Quartararo, Morbidelli kind of domination. Yeah, Binder probably does. Binder on the KTM at the very least is definitely better. But I think Oliveira has the better pace on the weekends where it's working. It's hard to say, but that's why I've given him a 7 because of his 2 wins and because his pace is good on some occasions. But yeah, he has been handily beaten by his teammate all season.
And to correct myself, there was 20 races this season. I just counted the flags at the top of my screen. Exactly, yeah. So we were correct in saying there was 21. So 16 out of 20 times he was beaten by his teammate. Of course, the 2 times he beat him were... So basically, the 3 times he beat him, I think out of the 4, I think he had 3 bike issues. Brad did. So
if you take out any like mechanical,
so it looks like that Brad beat him comfortably all year. Now again, you do say that he didn't beat him by 10-15 positions like Frankie and Fabio, but your main objective is always to
still beat him on the same bike. So that wasn't to discredit Binder. It was just to say that it's not quite as bad as some of the other comparisons.
Now we move on to our first rider inside the top 9. Jorge Martin, 152 points. Take it away.
I think you might be a bit surprised by what I've said here, but I've given him 5.
Okay.
5 out of 10. Because fast but erratic. Pole hound, but he crashed way too much. And if you ask me, it's a step back from last year, if anything. He won a race last year, didn't win a race this year. He led probably a similar amount of races. I actually saw, I can't remember the stat now, but I saw it when the season was done. The amount of laps led, Martin was like in the top 4, I think, of laps led. I think he had like a lot more laps led than Bastianini, but he just crashed every time he was leading or dropped back. I mean, if you think about the amount of races, Phillip Island, he was in the front for a lot of it. He was in the front for a while in Sepang, and he never led in Valencia, did he? Because Rins likes to flag that. But there was other races where he had led for a bit of those races. Yeah, Argentina, he led for ages, didn't he, till the late past him? Yeah. So he had those races, but it was just weird. His race pace kind of dropped off towards the end, so he definitely needs to focus on the tyres. And he also crashed out of a lot of races. I mean, he's lost the... Let's put it this way. Going into this season, it was quite obvious that he would get the factory Ducati seat, and he hasn't got it. So that kind of shows his season, really, because he was a shoo-in for... He's lost a seat that he already basically had signed the contract for, the way people were talking. I know, maybe it was he just dipped the feather in the ink. He was about to do it, and then Bastianini just comes to the right of his name quickly. It's just he kind of threw away a factory seat there just by crashing way too much. Pretty fast again, so that's at least good for him. He can take that because he's not lost his speed, but he's got to improve in the races next year.
You said you'd be surprised at what I would rate him, but we're pretty much bang on. I gave him 5.5 and said fast.
Oh, fair enough.
No consistency. So you said fast but erratic. I said no consistency. So we're nearly absolutely spot on with both of our opinions. You just the stat of him leading so many races was surprising, or leading as many laps. But if you do think of it, he was a pole hound. Usually would get a start. Usually would lead the first 8, 9, 10 laps, and then when you get to the business part of the race, you get passed by the likes of Bastianini or a Pecco or
he'd fall off,
or by the whole grid when he ends in the gravel. But again, shows very, very, very good pace. That pole position in Malaysia was like 0.7 under the lap record. For one lap, I think he's probably the fastest man on the grid. But you don't get points for 1 laps in MotoGP, so he does need to find some of the 2021 form, and I definitely think he shot himself in the foot losing that factory seat. I think, like you said, it was his, and the fact that Bastianini came in last minute and took it away from him is probably going to hurt him. Probably hurt him this year. That the fact that he couldn't kind of get a grasp on this year, and then Bastianini was winning races and podiums, and then people are starting to question it, and then I think it all started to fall apart, and that kind of was part of the reason why he did lose that seat in the end. But yeah, I think 5 and 5.5 is probably a decent score for his year. Moving on next
You'll
to
probably
Pete.
be, you'll
Sorry,
probably
go
be
on.
quite good in the sprint races next year. I just thought whilst you were saying that.
That's actually a good point, yeah.
Yeah.
If you can qualify well and get to the front, yeah, I suppose. But actually, one of his biggest issues that he said after Phillip Island was that he doesn't really understand in the race how much tyre he's left. He said many races this year that he led, he burnt out his tyre, went backwards. In Phillip Island, he did the opposite. He said towards the end of the race, he had too much tyre and it was kind of wasted on him. He wasted some pace, and he reckons that could have cost him the race win and a chance of going at the win. So he still has some sort of race analysis and race just his running of his race needs to be slightly figured out a bit, because it's just a bit inconsistent.
It was weird when he said that, though, because that doesn't make any sense to me. Because if you've got too much tyre left, well, then push harder, surely.
Yeah,
like, you've got more tyre than... I don't know, weird comment, but yeah, anyway, carry on now.
But yeah, so I think we've covered him enough. P9, no wins, couple of podiums, average. Up next, his teammate beat him by 14 points. I've actually a pretty harsh comment down about him. Johan Zarco, 6.5, the Invisible Man. When I went to look at him, I don't remember anything he did this year, to be honest. Maybe it's my memory's bad. He had a couple of good results. He had had 2 podiums, one in Barcelona, one in Indonesia in the wet. He was second in Portimao as well, and second in Germany. They grey him out on Wikipedia, and I confused my small brain. So 4 podiums actually is better. Couple of pole positions. Kind of, again, I stand by my Invisible Man, because he was on for probably his best chance of a victory this year in Silverstone. Crashed from pole. He's just his season's up and down again, and a lot of the year he was P7 and like kind of in that nowhere gap where you just don't see him.
It's interesting you say that, because I've given him a 5, the same as Martin. I've got typical Zarco, started well and dropped off. Can't think of a single thing he did all year. Exactly. So I think that just, kind of shows he did nothing. And that's exactly what I was thinking as well. He's just around about like 7th place, like in every race. And that might seem harsh, because what did you give him, a 7?
6.5.
6.5, sorry. So then I've given him only a 5. But he only just beat Martin. And all the stuff we've just slated Martin for, then this guy's only just beat him on the same bike. Kind of says, well, if you haven't crashed in all these races, why are you so close to him? You've obviously not done well enough. So that's a big reason why I've given him a 5, because if the teammates are right next to each other and one of them's done terribly, then so is the other one, really. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Can't really think of anything he did. I actually completely forgot that he got pole a couple of times. I know obviously he must have got one at least once. Kind of that stat that Marini was the only one that didn't, but I completely forgot about Silverstone. That would be the only thing really he did all year. Just crash out of a lead. That's not exactly what you're going to be remembered for.
Pole to P2 in Portimao, and pole to the gravel in Vale in Silverstone.
Yeah,
that was Zarco's season. Couple of fastest laps in Thailand and Australia.
Well, good job you get loads of points for those, isn't it?
Yeah, so exactly. Pretty under the radar. It's kind of his CV in GP. He's never really been a headline grabber, really. He's kind of always been like the mid-table, kind of on the right side of the mid-table. But yeah, disappointment again.
He was like unreal. That's the thing.
He was very quick, but he still faded, crashed, and probably still finished P6 in the championship them years if we were to look back up, I'd imagine. Moving on though to the top Suzuki of the two, Alex Rins. P7, 173 points. I give him a 6.5. A good start to the season, good finish, missing for the mid part. So again, we both talked earlier on how good Jean Mir started the season. Alex Rins started off 7th, 5th, 3rd, 2nd, 4th, and then we go to Jerez where Suzuki pulled out 19th, retired, did not start, came back in Netherlands with a 10th. Again, finished the season. His last 5 results were a retirement, 12th, 1st, 5th, 1st. So again, the in-between part is just poor. Very good start, very bad mid part, and a good finish. What did you make of Rins?
Yeah, I've got a lot of the same stuff written down. I've actually given 7.5 out of 10.
Fair enough.
So maybe there's a little bit of recency bias with that, to be fair. But good start, woeful middle, fantastic ending. I mean, you win 2 out of the last 3 races when your team is leaving at the end of the season. That's impressive, because there's not any development being put into that bike anymore at that point. So fair enough. I've got the same note at the end as well, hampered by team pulling out. That probably also factors into it a little bit. But to be fair to Rins, I'll give him credit. He kind of has been screwed more by this than Mir, because this year he's made a big step. He's crashed a lot less out of races. He's kept that pace. So in the past, like, he would beat Mir sometimes, but also crash out of a lot of races. So Mir would end up miles ahead of him in the championship because of that consistency. But this year, he was the one that was staying on. And when Mir was staying on, he was still beating Mir. So he was the quicker of the two all year. He also worked on probably one of his worst facets, and that's always the crashing. Yeah, his qualifying still wasn't great, but I think that's more the Suzuki than anything, because they both struggled to qualify. Although it is definitely an underlying rider trait for the two of them too. It's not all the Suzuki. But yeah, I think you can't really fault the guy there. He's had a good season. Yeah, the middle part was a bit bad, but then that again was partial. That was more down to the team probably than him. So I think 7.5 is fair, because if you fix one of your biggest weaknesses, then it's got to be a good season.
While you were talking there, I was just kind of looking at his results again, as I've been doing for a lot of the times when you're.
Yeah, this is where he's like crashed out at every race, and I'm like.
No, and it's actually from when Suzuki announced they're leaving in, we'll say, Jerez time. It broke into Jerez weekend.
It broke. It was on the test afterwards.
Yeah, it was kind of the Monday. They were told the Monday was leaked to Tuesday, so it was kind of the Jerez to Le Mans week, we could say. Basically, up until the point where he's kind of announced his deal with Honda, or it's kind of been probably pen to paper, he's had very poor results, and then his results go back again. So we're probably not looking into how much that affected him of getting a seat for 2023. Is probably why his results were pretty so bad in the mid part. Because if we kind of look towards, we'll say, San Marino, Aragon, 7th to 9th, then retirement, 12th first, 5th first. So his results seem to shoot back up in the last 3 or 4 rounds after his kind of contract is signed with Honda. So I think pressure off. I have a deal for next year. I can actually extract the most out of the bike. But again, I think I look forward to seeing him next year on Honda. It's going to be hard work for him. I think he struggled quite a bit early in the test on the day after the final race in Valencia. I think he struggled more than Mir. I would tip Mir a lot more though on a Honda than Rins, judging just on the style of riding for Jean Mir. P6, Brad Binder, I'm going to leave you go first in this, because I don't want to show off my how biased I am towards Brad yet.
Well, I've actually given him 8 out of 10, so higher than Oliveira, because you can't really rate him lower when he's absolutely smashed him. Under the radar all season, top 10s in all the races except 2. I actually looked at that to have a look at that. So that's pretty impressive, and I think one of those is a retirement. I think the other's an 11th place finish, I think, if I remember.
In America. It was actually 3. You missed America.
Was it 3?
Yeah, 3. So the retirement to Portugal, 12th in America, and he was 11th in Britain.
Ah, okay, my bad. Okay, bar 3 then. But even still, that's a fantastic season for him. His peaks, were lower than his teammate because he didn't win any races, which is a shame for him, I suppose, because this is the first time for a long time. I think first time since 2017 he's not won a race in a season. But he was more consistent. I mean, look at him. He's 6th in the championship. Oliveira's 10th. I don't know what the points between them are. It's probably not that much, to be fair. It's probably quite tight down that end of the championship. But even still, he's ridden better. He's KTM's golden boy. He pulled out some great performances. Started the season with the podium. Ended the season with the podium. Yeah, whatever happened in between. But those are the things people tend to remember, how the season started a little bit and then how it ended. So, yeah, you're only as good as your last race, I suppose. And 8 out of 10, I think that's more than fair for Brad Binder.
39 points was the difference between him and his teammates. He had 3 podiums all year, including a fastest lap in Valencia. All 3 of his podiums were P2s, and they came in dry conditions. 8.5 I gave him. It's always worth more, exactly. Yeah. We could argue all day of how much a kind of podium in dry is worth, but if you do it in the normal conditions, it just takes away that. They always say the rain is a great leveler, it takes the machinery away, and it kind of brings the riders to the core, you could say. But in the modern day Motogp, the bikes are so close, to get a dry podium is just something very hard to do. So to get 3 of them throughout the year just shows how good he's been this year. I gave him the 8.5, sublime season on what I would believe is a poor machine. I still don't rate the KTM bike at the moment. To finish almost 2 race runs ahead of his teammate. The interesting part of this is he's finished 1 point behind Jack Miller, which
Yeah.
Jack Miller had. We'll
I
get
think
him
that will be
next time.
reflected in our ratings for Jack Miller.
Yeah, possibly. I still have rated Miller quite high. I believe he had a good season, and we'll get to him in a second. But Binder for me has just been sublime. Like you mentioned, 3 times all year that he didn't finish in the top 10 is just absolutely so consistent. If he can find some pace next year with the bike in terms of one lap pace, he could be a dark horse for the title. Whether he could, if KTM can get him the package, it'll be brilliant to see what they can actually muster up in 23. But we're going to move now to the Aussie, Jack Miller. I'm going to go first. I gave him an 8, best season in MotoGP. He came home with, I'm going to just count his podiums, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, race win, 6. 6 podiums on a championship winning bike. Not bad. Probably could have got a podium in Portugal. Did he not crash? We go back, if you look back to Catalunya, P14, the day after Catalunya, they had a test. He changed something on the bike, and then since then he was absolutely rapid. Probably was on for a good result in his home race if it wasn't for Alex Marquez, but the wheels just kind of fell off his championship kind of push from, we'll say, Thailand onwards. After his podium in Thailand, DNF in Australia, DNF in Valencia, and a P6 in Malaysia. So I think an 8 is fair. Again, he's had a very good season. He's improved in a lot of aspects. Having that win on fast lap in Japan in dry condition, nothing funky. P2 in France, a couple of P3s spread out through the season. Very good year for him.
Well, I've given him a 6.5.
I can see where though.
Seems a bit harsh now,
I can see where it goes.
He showed some good performances, definitely. Motegi in particular, that was complete domination. But he was too inconsistent overall. I don't want to give away too much about what I'm going to say about his teammate, but considering the amount of times his teammate crashed and he still lost to him, kind of tells me he probably wasn't good enough this season. That's, all I'm going to say about that for now, because I'll still talk about Bagnaia later. But 6.5 for Jack, yeah, I think I could also see where you've gave him an 8 because, yeah, actually, you make a good point. He had a good run of form after Catalunya. I mean, Mugello and Catalunya were woeful, weren't he? He was like, was he like outside the top 20 at one point in Mugello? I seem to remember.
P21, I believe he was on the opening couple of laps.
Yeah, it was terrible. So, and that was a wet qualifying as well. So, you'd expect him to be up there. So that's probably a little bit why I've given him such a bad score. But I can also see, I think we could both see where we've come from there. I think he's had an up and down season, which it probably the real rating probably falls somewhere between the two, maybe 7.5. But yeah, I can see why they've got rid of him anyway. I mean, obviously he's outperformed the satellite guys, but yeah, overall his consistency just isn't there.
Moving on to probably the surprise of the season, P4 the championship, 212 points on an Aprilia, a late Espargaro. I think we're both going to give this guy pretty high rating. I've gone 8.5, proved a lot of people wrong, winning his first race in Argentina of his whole Motor Grand Prix career, not just in MotoGP class, getting so many podiums. He was on a great streak of 4 podiums before his home race where he made a mathematical error that cost him. Going on after that, he had a good race in Germany, P4, came 4th after having a massive incident early on with Fabio in the Dutch TT. Then we went to Britain and he had a big crash, and then his season kind of went downhill. Got 1 podium in the second half of the season, and then I think he was more plagued by the Aprilia's lack of performance more than anything like his teammate. What did you give Aleix on his best season of his career?
So I actually gave him an 8, so similar kind of rating there. True underdog. I mean, he got his first ever victory, just like you said, and he was involved in an unlikely title battle. What odds would you have got going into this season saying that Aleix Espargaro is going to be fine for the championship? Let's say, still within mathematical contention of the championship, 2 races to go. You'd have got great odds on that. Maybe not so good after testing, but certainly beforehand you would have done. And yeah, I mean, great season for him. How many years has he been grafting? That's his first win since CEV back in the day, and that must have been the mid-2000s when he got that. So good, again, for 15 years since his last race win. So, just hats off to the guy. No one expected the Aprilia, no one expected him. And I think, and I will be the first to admit this, I think he's proved that he's a better rider than people gave him credit for. Always knew he was a decent midfieldish rider, but I always kind of thought, if you get somebody else on the Aprilia, they'd do a better job, but it doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, he outperformed Vinales, who's someone I definitely thought was better than Aleix. So, yeah, I think 8.5, that would be both fair scores there. And aside from the Catalonia mistake, he's not really made any mistakes. The rest of it was either the team mistake or the bike, really. And obviously Fabio nerfing him off, but that was a comeback ride and a half. That was.
Yeah, I think that really showed his true mettle, that he came back from such a running through the gravel and then came out and just rode like a maniac, kind of mirrors Rossi.
Best race of his career, definitely.
100%. Rossi 2003 in Phillip Island, where he just rolled the wheels off. I think similar for Leish, where he just I know I have ridiculous pace, and it was just qualifying lap after qualifying lap, and to get back and to end up finishing in P4 with the fastest lap, no surprise. It was a stunning result. Again, I'm just looking at his championship standings here. He ended up P4, 7 points behind Bastianini. That was probably down to the fact that he retired from the last race of the year. Throw him into P7 and he takes P3 in the championship, which is a shame for me, because I think I would have liked to see him get to top 3, because I don't reckon. Now again, we just talked about how he's been doubted all his whole career. But then again, next year I still reckon he's going to have a tough year. I don't think it's going to be as easy. I don't think Aprilia will make as much of a step as they did from 21 to 22. But look, I could be wrong. I hope I am wrong, to be brutally honest. I really would like to see him up there again. It's been a good breath of fresh air to see him over the last 2 years getting podiums and getting that win under their belt, and signing such a high caliber rider as Maverick Vinales has really kind of showed their intent. Now we are down to the final 3 in the championship. I'll be surprised if any of these are under 8s. But anyway, we'll get into P3. Enea Bastianini, take it away.
Well, for Bastianini, I've given him an 8 as well. Overall improvement from last season. Obviously, his rookie season was a pretty good rookie season. Got a couple of podiums towards the end of it. Obviously, it started off a bit quiet. He had a big qualifying weakness. He's worked on that a lot this season. Some weekends, fair enough, that's still been an issue, but I think a lot of the tracks where, if he'd been there before, he qualified pretty decently. He won on a satellite bike, won on the first race of this season. Let's not forget, it's not exactly like... it is a well-established team. It's a Gresini team, but they split from Aprilia this year. So for both teams, they've done a good job. I think a lot of the personnel probably stayed at Aprilia, so a lot of the personnel probably knew. Obviously, they were hiring new trucks and things like that. So, and obviously in the aftermath of Fausto's death as well, I think they've pulled together and done a great job overall running the team. I know it's easier to run a satellite bike than a factory bike, but even still, great performance from him all season. He kept a cool head in races and managed to beat the eventual world champion in a couple of head-to-heads. So 8 out of 10, perhaps even maybe 8.5. A great performance from Bastianini.
Yeah, you just touched on 8.5. I've gone with the higher 8.5. Stunning season on the GP21. The reason behind that, the race wins, the fastest laps, the improved qualifying. Of course, he's not had a perfect season. Finishing P3 in the championship is brilliant. A nice amount of podiums. The extra 0.5 overview I would give Justin how many times he managed to battle his way through and what he was able to do against his factory mate Pecco Bagnaia, and he really put a bit of a sweat on in the Ducati camp in a couple of them races. If you look back at San Marino, Aragon, Malaysia, there was a lot going on there that a lot of people were kind of maybe unhappy with Enea, but he was just kind of flexing his pace is the way I would look at it. So in fairness to him, brilliant season. I cannot wait to see him next year on the big red Bologna rocket alongside Pecco. So yeah, brilliant season, well deserving of the factory seat over Jorge Martin in the end. And yeah, I think we've pretty much covered him. He's done a brilliant year. He came into the year focusing on his one lap pace and got only one pole position I can see here, but that was more than his 2021 season, so can't really discredit him. He's had a lot better races this year, and that was probably down to the fact he was qualifying slightly further up the grid. P2 in the championship, of course, is France's Fabio Quartararo. Rhys, I went with a 9. I'll be interested to see what you think. I think you were gone for a 9 as well, judging on what we were talking about beforehand. Outperformed a poor bike. Bad luck, in my opinion, cost him the championship. He lost the championship in the end by, if my maths is correct, 23 points. 22 points, sorry, 22 points. So almost a race wins worth. He led the championship for so long, lost it in the last couple of rounds. Again, I go back to the point of how bad the Yamaha was all year. Cal Crutchlow came out actually in the last week or so and said he believes he is the rider getting the most out of his machinery on the grid currently. So I think my only rider at the moment who's gone into 9 out of the top 12 or top grid was him. So at the moment, he has a lot to work to do next year in terms of bike development, but in terms of his own performance, I think he was absolutely astonishing in some of them races. I look back to the races in Austria, coming home on the podium behind Pecco. There's just a couple of races there that you just expect him to have a bad result. He got P2 in Mugello, so really just a great season. Just slightly unfortunate he didn't get his championship because he did so well. I believe he outperformed Pecco for most of the season, and I think just it came down to machinery in the end. So I'm interested to see what you have to say about him.
Yep, I've given him a 9 as well. You're right in your detective skills there, based on what we were saying before. Excellent season. 2 mistakes all year. One was a botched pass on a Leish, and then I suppose technically you say 3. One was running wide at the Honda hairpin in Australia, and then the other one was crashing later on in the race. But both those mistakes really came from overriding the bike. I'd say the bigger mistake was the Assen one because it was a little bit needless. He didn't need to pass a Leish there. It was probably a smaller mistake in terms of actually what he did wrong, but it was a little bit reckless to do. He probably could have won that race had he not done that, or he would have probably beat Bagnaia. I think those two would have beat Bagnaia in that race, which makes a difference because all of a sudden he's got 20 more points, Bagnaia's got 9 less. That's championship. And then also you take from the fact that he got the long lap from that, which then he was given at the next race. So that made him pick a different tyre because he needed to get to the front, which didn't work for him. Had he been on the same tyre as everybody else, he was in second place when Zarco crashed, so he was right up there. If he'd been leading and not had to take a long lap, a few more points there. Bagnaia feels the pressure a bit more, maybe makes a mistake somewhere else. So either way, just more points. The momentum's more with Fabio. Obviously, the weird collision with Marquez. So yeah, like you say, there's a lot of bad luck, but it all seems to stem from the one mistake. But I'm not going to criticise him too much. He's overriding a bike that's quite poor. Look at him. He's second in the championship. Next Yamaha's 19th. I think that says more about him than anything. And both those guys, but all the other Yamaha riders got less than 50 points. So I think, you can't criticise Quartararo's season. Yes, he didn't win, but yeah, it definitely came down to machinery rather than rider talent in the end, unfortunately. For Quartararo, anyway.
Yeah, it was. You make a very, very solid point with the Dutch TT. Doesn't make that mistake. Give him. We'll just for argument's sake, we give him plus 20. Pecco, take a few points off him. That is them going into the final race.
Yeah, even if we say that, let's say he finished third behind them, still let Bagnaia win. He's got 16 more points already. And
exactly.
That's not
And if we have the race that we have in Valencia where he comes P4 and Pecco's 9th, you just don't.
That enough?
That then comes down to Pecco doesn't have the opportunity to ride 2 seconds off the pace and leave Frankie come through and leave Luca come through. He has to kind of scrap for it because of what could happen. He probably doesn't make the mistake in Australia. They probably don't risk as much in Thailand with the tyre pressures. There's we could call that. We could just say there's another 15 points. Now, of course, these are if, buts, and maybes, but that is the whole point of these podcasts, is to kind of wonder what could have been if he doesn't make the mistake. Because then you go to Silverstone, doesn't have the long lap, doesn't choose a different tyre. He came home in Silverstone P8. You could say he could have got a P4, P5. Again, he does probably 50 to 60 points that Fabio's lost on that kind of one bad decision of making an overtake in Aston. And unfortunately, it's probably
he only needs a couple more points here and there, and it makes a difference.
I don't know. Of course, we'll get on to Pecco in a second, and we can completely have the same argument again. But 9 overall for him, I think, is a brilliant result. I think he should really be proud of himself this year. He showed some great strength, outperforming everyone on the bike, and no one even coming close. So
it's probably better than he was last year, to be fair.
Yeah, I'd say so. I think last year he had so many issues with the arm pump, he had the leathers opening, there was so many little spots throughout his year that were kind of just maybe just small question marks, whereas this year he's shown to me that I've said it throughout the podcast all year. I wasn't rating him high enough. Now I rate him as probably one of the best riders of his generation at the moment. He is something special. But we have talked about Pecco or Fabio enough. We're now going to jump on to the championship. P1, 265 points, 22 points clear of his nearest rival. What did you give Pecco back? Now,
so I actually gave him an 8 out of 10. To be honest, that's obviously he won the championship, so you can't exactly rate him low. You can't say, oh, he had a terrible season because he won the championship. But that's just more to the number of wins. He won 7 races, if my maths is correct, from looking at the wiki page earlier. That's just counting, so hopefully it's correct. The 7 races, you can't say someone that's won 7 races in a season has a bad score. However, if he'd won 7 races and then also not crashed in the other races, he probably could have got a 10 out of 10 for me. Because, you know, if you're winning that many races and then doing well in the other races where you haven't won, you could almost say that's a 10 out of 10 or like a 9.5 out of 10. Maybe it's impossible to say 10 out of 10. But we're talking Marquez 2019 style season with that many race wins and, you know, finishing okay in the other races. But he crashed so many times. I mean, let's not forget, right? Fabio Quartararo obviously was 22 points behind and we said, oh, we got unlucky. You know, he made a couple of little mistakes, but he shouldn't have been anywhere near winning that championship. If you've won 7 races, he won about 4 in a row. He crashed out of second place like twice as well, I think. He also crashed out of a position that was not so good, like about 11th or something like that in Motogp. But it's just the mistakes. There was too many mistakes. But I can't dwell on that too much. There's no point bashing the guy. He won the championship still, so it doesn't really matter. So I think his performance over the season, his pace was phenomenal. There's no question about his pace. And in the second half of the season, to be fair, aside from that one incident at Motogp, which, you know, it does happen. It's easily done, especially on the last lap when you're closing up to your championship rival. You just grab the brake a little bit too much to lose the front. That turn 3 is a tricky corner, so not going to hold that too much against him. Second half of the season, he improved that big weakness, which was the crashes. Also, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. One of them was Nakagami's fault and not his. So, yeah, I mean, you can't say that a World Championship winning season's bad. So, yeah, a good season from him overall, but definitely could have been better. But he did get it over the line in the end.
I've gone 8.5 now, pretty much for exactly the same reasons. I've just given him extra 0.5 just because he brought home the championship. I have here my notes. Great year, still has major weaknesses. So I'm looking at his championship here and you just forget how inconsistent he's been. If he didn't win races, he only had 3 other podiums. He didn't get a podium until Jerez, which he won. Next race he fell off, then the next race he won, then he fell off. Well, he got taken out in Catalonia, but it still was a retirement. Crashed needlessly in Germany behind his main championship rival. At that point, he had publicly wrote off the championship, then wins the next 4 races, include pole position at the Netherlands. P2 in Aragon, we already spoke about how he's beaten by his factory mate. Then everybody's saying championship's back on, he goes to Japan, Ducati track, he crashes again. Go to Thailand, wet race, Fabio struggles, he does a very good job, also gets babysit by most of the Ducati riders. Wins in Malaysia again, good performance, but again you feel like maybe Bastianini could have won it if he wanted to. Then again he comes to Valencia and he doesn't need to do much, but he rides tight all weekend, complains that the bike doesn't turn the front end. A pretty common complaint when you're not riding fluid, when you're riding stiff as the bike doesn't want to turn. So mentally, he's nowhere near as strong as Valentino ever was, even though many people consider him to be the current day Valentino, the way he beat Marquez at Aragon last year. A lot of people think that he's at caliber. His pace-wise is fantastic. He is probably within the top 3 fastest men on the planet at the moment in the GP category. But mentally, he's just not there. And to be honest, coming up to the ranks, I never would have kind of put him a mentally weaker rider. Now again, first actual chance of winning a title this year. Last year was kind of against all odds if he was going to win it, probably kind of like Fabio this year, but he made so many mistakes. And if I'm Bastianini coming into next year, I know that my guy next to me is weaker than me mentally, so we'll see how the future plays out for him. But he has a lot of work to do on just finishing races. Like France, got passed by Bastianini, tried to basically up his pace, crashed. So we could look at, I can see 3 races here. Japan, Germany and France, where he didn't need to crash in them races. We can call it 40 points from France and Germany if he comes home in second, and we call another 5, we'll say, for the few points. That's a race wins victory worth of points. That would put him up at 290 points if he could have done that. So that really would have put the championship out of doubt if he did that. Now, of course, it's easier said than done, but these mistakes cannot happen next year.
No, they really can't. I mean, especially with defending the championship. I think the pressure definitely comes onto it a bit, because you made a good point of saying that, after the race where he crashed and he said the championship's over, he then starts performing all of a sudden, and then he crashed as soon as the pressure was back on. So I think the pressure does still get to him. When we saw at Valencia, yes, his bike was a bit damaged, and of course he did only need to finish P14, so why would you risk it? But he did, he looked like he's feeling the pressure all weekend there. So going into next year, he definitely does need to make sure that he continues to fix this weakness, because I think I will give him the benefit of the doubt. I think it did seem like he had improved on that, because Malaysia was a race where he could very easily have crashed out of, and he didn't. He actually managed to win that race as well. It wasn't even like he set for second. He went for that and he managed to get it. So I think he's turned a corner. But yeah, we'll have to see next year to see if it's the old Bagnaia or the new one that turns up.
So there we have it. We've rated all top 25. Some weird scores, some funny scores, some not so funny. So it's been a long podcast, probably our longest 100. About an hour and 20 minutes, judging by my recording time in the corner. Seems to be probably our longest ever podcast. We will have one more podcast coming this year, probably around the holiday time of Christmas. We won't spoil what it is about, but we are working in the shadows for a few more podcasts to come as well.
Spoiler, it's about Motogp.
Yeah, spoiler, it's about Motogp. That is the probably the most easy giveaway you'll ever get. But have you any final words on the 2022 season, Rhys, before we wrap up on the podcast?
Oh, really? How quick did that go? That's probably my biggest takeaway from it. I mean, it was a crazy season. One of the better seasons. But I remember, especially midway through the season, we were kind of like, these races have been very boring. It was something that needs to be improved for next year. Definitely is the overtaking. I'm looking forward to these sprint races. I know, again, that's not about 2022, but I suppose we're rounded off 22, talking about the end of the season, going into the next one. So yeah, a quick season, an interesting title fight, but we didn't really see the contenders go, bar to bar that much. There was a couple of occasions, but really, we still haven't seen Fabio and Bagnaia knock clubs out of each other, aside from Valencia. That was the closest we've ever seen to that, and that was quite enthralling. So maybe if we could get a bit more of that next year, that'd be nice to see.
Yeah, I do agree that it was probably not the best racing, but it was a very interesting season nonetheless. We are going to leave it there for the Motogp season of 2022. Thank you for tuning in to the countless amount of podcasts. We've had a lot of fun. I've been Dylan. He's been Rhys. We'll be back for a 2023 preview of some sort. We won't spoil any more than that in the coming month or so. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for tuning in throughout the season. I will see you in the not so distant future. Bye-bye.